Right now, at this exact second, you are probably holding a glowing slab of glass and metal.
Yeah, or, maybe it's sitting in your pocket or just resting on a desk nearby.
Exactly. And here's the bizarre, deeply counterintuitive reality of that device. It operates on principles so completely unhinged from human common sense that Albert Einstein, the guy who gave us relativity, went to his grave refusing to accept them.
It really is wild when you stop and think about it.
Right. You trust this little device to route your life savings, to guide your car at 70 miles an hour down a busy highway, and, to manage your private conversations.
Oh, absolutely. We trust it with everything.
But if we were to take the actual foundational physics that make your smartphone work and explain them to you, it would sound indistinguishable from witchcraft.
It truly would. We treat our technology as if it's an extension of, basic rational mechanics.
Like a bicycle or a water wheel or something.
Exactly. You can just see the gears turning. But at the foundational level, it absolutely is not that. The modern world is built on a foundation of profound, completely unresolved mysteries.
And that actually brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive. Welcome in, by the way. We are looking at an incredibly dense, fascinating stack of sources today.
Yeah, ranging from quantum physics and computer science all the way to evolutionary biology and ancient biblical theology.
It's a wide net. And when you stack all these sources together, this glaring, almost hilarious human contradiction emerges for you to see.
It's a huge contradiction.
We, as a species, we happily bet our lives, our economies, and our futures on technological and biological black boxes that we just do not comprehend.
Right. We sleep perfectly soundly while floating on this infinite ocean of mysteries we can't manipulate.
Yes. But then ask many of those same people to trust a God they cannot weigh, measure, or, put under a microscope, and suddenly incomprehension is a total deal breaker.
Which is such a fascinating cognitive dissonance. Suddenly, the phrase, "I don't fully understand it," becomes this rationalization to withhold trust.
When really that's an accurate description of how we navigate a normal Tuesday morning.
Exactly. It's how we survive.
So today, for you listening, we are going to unpack this. We're going to pull apart the mechanics of the mysteries we do trust implicitly. Things like quantum physics, self-taught artificial intelligence, the human mind.
We want to understand how they work, or rather why we trust them when we don't actually know how they work.
Yeah, and then we are going to apply that exact same standard of trust to ancient biblical texts.
We're essentially going to ask, what happens when you treat ancient scripture with the same epistemological framework that you apply to your smartphone's microchip?
Now, before we jump in, I do need to give a quick but super important disclaimer.
It's very important.
As we look at these sources, especially when we touch on historically or politically charged topics like the modern state of Israel or central bank digital currencies, we are not taking any political sides today.
None at all.
Our goal here is strictly impartial. We are just evaluating how ancient textual patterns map onto modern historical and technological realities. We're not endorsing political viewpoints left, right, or center. We're just reporting the ideas in the source material.
Yeah, we are just following the patterns wherever they lead.
All right, let's jump right into the deep end, because before we can talk about why we doubt the divine, we have to establish what we actually do trust every single day.
And there is no better place to start than the absolute bedrock of the modern world, which is quantum physics.
The sources are incredibly clear on this. It is the most successful physical theory human beings have ever produced.
By a massive margin, yeah. The mathematical predictions of quantum mechanics match experimental reality to staggering decimal places.
Give us an example. How does this actually show up in everyday life?
Well, if you want to understand the sheer scale of its success, just look at the transistor.
Okay, the tiny switches inside the computer chips.
Exactly. Inside the device you're using to listen to this deep dive right now,
Yeah.
there are billions of microscopic switches called transistors. They dictate the flow of electricity, the ones and zeros of the entire digital age.
Right.
But as these transistors became microscopic over the years, engineers ran into a physical wall. The electrons, which are the actual particles carrying the electrical current, they would just leak through the solid barriers meant to contain them.
Which, that sounds impossible. It's like throwing a tennis ball at a solid brick wall, and instead of bouncing back, the tennis ball just magically goes through to the other side without breaking any bricks.
That is precisely what is happening. And in physics, it's called quantum tunneling.
Quantum tunneling. Wow.
Classical physics says that if a particle doesn't have enough kinetic energy to overcome a barrier, it bounces back. Period. Zero exceptions.
But the quantum realm doesn't play by those rules.
Not at all. In the quantum realm, particles don't actually have exact locations. They exist as probability waves.
Wait, probability waves, so they aren't even solid objects.
Not in the way we think of them. There is a tiny, non-zero mathematical probability that the electron is actually already on the other side of the solid barrier. And because they are behaving as waves of probability, they occasionally just appear on the other side.
So the engineers building our phones didn't solve this by understanding why the universe allows solid matter to act like a probability ghost.
Nope. They just said, well, the math says a certain percentage of electrons will ghost through the wall, so let's just build the microchip to account for that leakage.
That's just wild. They just engineered around the mystery.
Exactly. And we use quantum tunneling every day. It's in flash memory drives. Or consider magnetic resonance imaging, the MRI machine.
Oh, yeah. If you tear a knee ligament or need a brain scan, you get into that giant loud tube.
Right. And that tube uses the quantum property of nuclear spin. Without diving too deep into the math, basically, protons in your body's water molecules act like tiny compass needles. The MRI uses a massive magnetic field to force all those quantum needles to align. Then it blasts them with radio waves to knock them out of alignment.
And then it measures the energy they release as they snap back into place?
Exactly. We use that deeply weird quantum behavior to see inside a living human body without ever picking up a scalpel.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Or what about GPS? This one always blows my mind from the sources.
Oh, GPS is a perfect example.
Yeah, like the satellites orbiting the Earth right now, the ones keeping our navigation apps from driving us into a lake. They rely on atomic clocks.
Very precise atomic clocks.
And those clocks have to constantly adjust for both quantum mechanics and relativity, because time literally moves faster for a satellite up in orbit than it does for your car down on the ground.
Right, because the satellite is further away from Earth's gravity. Well, time is relative.
So if engineers didn't manually correct for that relativistic time drift by a few microseconds every single day, the entire GPS grid would fail, right?
It would fail within a matter of hours. Your location on your phone would be miles off.
Yeah.
Lasers, solar panels, the encryption protecting the entire global banking system. It is all built on quantum mechanics.
So we have literally built civilization's entire nervous system on subatomic witchcraft.
Pretty much.
It's like building a 100-story skyscraper on a foundation of fog, but trusting it because the floors don't collapse.
That is a great analogy.
But here is the part that I think the average person doesn't realize, and where the sources really focus. The physicists building these systems, they do not know why the universe works this way.
And we need to be very, very clear about what don't know means in this context. They know the math.
Right, the equations work.
The equations, like the Schrödinger equation, are flawless predictive tools. But what the math actually represents in physical reality, the underlying philosophical interpretation of those equations, it is pure, unadulterated chaos within the physics community.
Let's break that down for the listener, because people throw around terms like Copenhagen interpretation and many worlds in sci-fi movies all the time.
Oh yeah, Marvel movies love those terms.
Right. But what are the actual mechanics of the disagreement here?
Well, it all centers on something called the measurement problem.
Okay.
Before you measure a quantum particle, the math says it exists in a superposition. That's a blur of all possible states at once. But the exact moment you measure it, or look at it, or interact with it in any way, that blur collapses into a single, definite reality.
Ah, the famous Schrödinger's cat thought experiment.
Exactly. The cat in the box is mathematically both alive and dead until you open the lid and look.
So the Copenhagen interpretation, which was championed by Niels Bohr, essentially says, hey, don't ask what's happening behind the curtain.
Right.
Yeah.
The act of measurement itself forces the universe to pick a state. Reality literally doesn't exist in a definite form until it interacts with the macroscopic system.
Which is a crazy concept.
It is. And many physicists find that deeply unsatisfying. I mean, why should human observation or any measurement at all have a special magical role in dictating the physical universe?
Which naturally leads to the many worlds interpretation, which sounds like something straight out of a comic book multiverse. But our sources show it is treated with absolute dead serious academic rigor by brilliant minds.
Oh, very serious rigor. The many worlds theory argues that the wave function never actually collapses.
Wait, so the blur never goes away?
No, instead, every time a quantum interaction occurs, the entire universe physically splits.
Just splits in two.
Yeah, if an electron can spin up or spin down, reality branches into two distinct, non-communicating universes. One where it's spun up, one where it spun down.
So to avoid the mystery of the wave collapse, this theory just casually posits the creation of an infinite number of parallel universes every single millisecond.
Exactly. And then you have others arguing for pilot wave theories, where there is a hidden layer of determinism guiding the particles that we just can't see yet.
The point is, you have brilliant people spending their entire careers fiercely defending one of these models, and none of them can prove the others wrong.
As the Nobel laureate Richard Feynman bluntly put it, and remember, this is a guy who helped invent quantum electrodynamics, he said, "I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics."
Wow. And if we pull back and look at the sociology of this, it reveals something really profound about the human epistemology of trust.
How so?
Well, we didn't wait for the mystery to resolve, did we?
No,
We didn't say, hey, let's hold off on building the internet and let's not use MRI machines to spot tumors until the physics department at MIT finally agrees on the metaphysical implications of wave function collapse.
No, we absolutely did not wait. We observed a pattern. The math worked repeatedly and reliably.
And we built our entire civilization on that pattern. We embraced the utility while remaining utterly blind to the underlying why.
That is perfectly stated. We trust the pattern.
Okay, so that's the mystery out there in the fabric of the universe. But let's bring it closer to home and look at a mystery we built with our own hands. Artificial intelligence.
Oh, this is a massive one.
Because, you know, the narrative used to be that computers only do exactly what humans program them to do.
And that was totally true for classical computing. It was highly deterministic.
Right, like an if-then statement.
Exactly. A human engineer wrote an explicit logical rule. If condition A is met, execute command B. If the program failed, you could go back into the code, find the exact line where the logic broke down, and fix it. You could read the architecture.
But modern AI, specifically deep learning, completely abandoned that paradigm, didn't it?
Completely. The sources highlight a massive paradigm shift with a program called AlphaZero.
I really want to unpack the mechanics of this for you listening, because it's not just a faster calculator, it's a completely different way of processing reality.
Let's use the board game Go as the framework here. Go is an ancient strategy game played on a 19 by 19 grid.
Right, with a black and white stone.
Yes, and a number of possible board configurations in Go is larger than the number of adders in the observable universe.
Wrap your head around that for a second. You cannot brute force calculate a game of Go. A supercomputer cannot just map out every possible future move and pick the winning one.
Because there literally isn't enough computing power on Earth, or even in the universe, to process that many permutations.
So humans play Go using intuition, right? Pattern recognition and heuristics like rules of thumb developed over thousands of years of human gameplay.
Exactly. Now, when the company DeepMind built the original AlphaGo program, they trained it by feeding it millions of historical games played by human experts. It learned our human patterns.
And it was really good.
It was amazing. But its successor, AlphaZero, took a terrifyingly radical leap.
They gave it nothing.
Literally nothing. Only the basic rules of the game. They gave it no historical data, no human strategies, no expert tips, no opening books. They just built a neural network and told it to play against itself.
Millions and millions of times.
Exactly.
But how does that actually work mechanically? How does a blank slate teach itself to be a grandmaster?
Through a process heavily reliant on something called backpropagation and reinforcement learning.
Okay. English, please.
Right, sorry. Essentially, the network starts by making completely random, terrible moves. It loses, obviously. But every time a game ends, the system looks at the outcome and sends a signal backward through its artificial neurons. These are called its hidden layers.
Hidden layers, okay.
It slightly adjusts millions of mathematical weights and biases. It strengthens the pathways that led to a win, and it severely punishes the pathways that led to a loss. And it repeats this process millions of times a day.
And the result was that within a matter of hours, it didn't just master the game. It completely bypassed centuries of accumulated human wisdom.
Human grandmasters analyzing AlphaZero's games were completely baffled. It was making sacrifices and territorial plays that contradicted every foundational principle human beings had ever devised for the game.
I remember reading that they called its strategies alien, like it was from another planet.
It was. It had discovered truths about the game of Go in a few hours that the combined intellect of humanity hadn't found in 3 millennia.
That is just wild. And this self-play architecture isn't limited to board games either. The exact same foundational concept gave us AlphaFold.
Right, which solved one of the absolute holy grails of biology, the protein folding problem.
Yeah, for 50 years, scientists struggled to predict how a linear chain of amino acids would fold up into a three-dimensional protein.
And if you know the 3D shape of a protein, you understand its function, which is the master key to drug discovery and curing diseases.
Human scientists spent decades meticulously mapping protein structures one by one using X-ray crystallography. It took months just for a single protein.
But AlphaFold, it looked at the sequences, taught itself the underlying physical and chemical patterns, and accurately predicted the structures of nearly every protein known to science in a matter of months.
We are literally using a black box to cure diseases.
Yes, but here is the uncomfortable truth at the bottom of all this, which the sources call the interpretability problem.
This is the scary part.
We have human engineers who built these deep neural networks. But because the network taught itself by adjusting millions, and in the case of modern large language models, trillions of mathematical weights, the internal logic is now completely opaque to the creators.
Opaque, meaning we have no idea how it thinks.
We can see the input, like the medical scan, the chessboard, the text prompt, and we can see the output, which is a flawless cancer diagnosis, an alien chess move, a brilliantly written essay.
But the hidden layers in between.
They are just massive, unreadable matrices of floating point numbers. We cannot print out a logical roadmap explaining why the AI weighted a specific subpixel in a radiological scan to conclude a tumor was malignant.
I read we literally have to create secondary AI programs just to try and reverse engineer and study the primary AI programs to guess how they are thinking.
It's absurd. We're creating minds that are opaque to us.
And yet, look at our behavior as a society. We trust AI for medical diagnoses. We use algorithmic fraud detection in our global financial grids. We use AI to manage entire supply chains.
We trust a trillion parameter calculus happening in the silicon. Not because we comprehend it, but because the output is consistently effective.
Exactly. We built a machine that teaches itself truths we cannot verify step by step, and we trust the pattern of its performance while remaining functionally blind to its internal processing. We have essentially outsourced global epistemology to a black box.
Which perfectly transitions us to the third black box from our sources.
Okay.
And this is the most intimate one by far.
Yeah, we've talked about the physics of the universe out there and the Silicon brains we built on desks. But what about the biological brain doing the analyzing? Human consciousness.
This is the ultimate mystery, because it is the one mystery you can never step outside of to objectively examine. Your consciousness is the actual instrument you are using to measure consciousness.
Think about this right now. If you are listening to this, you are using a 3-pound lump of wet electricity, water, and fat inside your skull to process our voices, translate sound waves into English vocabulary, and generate mental imagery.
And yet, modern science has absolutely no idea what subjective consciousness actually is.
In the philosophy of mind and cognitive science, this is known as the hard problem of consciousness. It's a framework famously articulated by the philosopher David Chalmers.
Right. Chalmers drew a critical distinction between the easy problems of the mind and the hard problem.
Let's be clear, though, the easy problems are still incredibly difficult neuroscience, right?
Oh, absolutely. The easy problems refer to mapping the mechanical functional capabilities of the brain. For example, how does the brain integrate sensory information? How do we focus attention? How do neurons fire across synapses to store a memory?
We can put a person in a functional MRI machine, show them a picture of an apple, and watch the visual cortex physically light up on a screen.
We can track the electrochemical cascades, that is mechanical mapping. Eventually, with enough time and technology, we will solve the easy problems.
But the hard problem is entirely different. The hard problem asks, why does that physical electrochemical activity produce a subjective, vivid internal experience?
Exactly. Why does seeing an apple produce the subjective, phenomenal experience of redness? Why does a specific neural firing pattern produce the visceral, deep ache of grief or the sudden, dizzying feeling of nostalgia?
Why isn't the brain just a highly sophisticated biological computer processing all this data in the dark?
A philosophical zombie.
Yes. Explain that concept.
A philosophical zombie is a thought experiment. It's a creature that acts exactly like a human, talks like a human, runs from danger like a human, but has no actual inner life. No one is, quote-unquote, home inside the skull.
Right. From a purely materialist evolutionary standpoint, complex computation doesn't strictly require subjective experience. I mean, a self-driving car processes massive amounts of visual data and makes complex decisions to avoid crashing.
But we don't believe the car feels anxiety when it sees a pedestrian stepping into the road.
Exactly. So why did human computation develop the capacity to actually feel?
The dominant materialist worldview insists that consciousness must somehow emerge from complex computation once it reaches a certain threshold. But there is this massive, unbridged explanatory gap between objective physical matter like atoms and molecules and a subjective immaterial mind.
No one has solved it. We just have competing theories. We have panpsychism, which is the wild idea that consciousness is a fundamental property of matter, like mass or charge.
Yeah, the idea that even a single electron has some infinitesimally tiny sliver of experience.
And then we have global workspace theory, which argues consciousness is just the brain broadcasting information to a central hub. We have dualism, but we have no proof for any of it.
We cannot even say with 100% empirical certainty that an octopus or a dog or a large language model AI has an intersubjective experience.
What's fascinating here is the sheer irony of human behavior. We operate with absolute, unquestioning confidence using a tool, our conscious mind, whose origin, nature, and physical mechanism we cannot even define.
You don't wait for neuroscientists to solve the hard problem of consciousness before you decide to fall in love, or make a moral judgment, or just enjoy a sunset.
No. We use our consciousness every single second of every day to debate the existence of God, to demand evidence for reality without having a clue what consciousness actually is. The irony is just staggering.
So if we synthesize this entire first section, quantum physics, self-taught artificial intelligence, human consciousness, these are the three pillars of modern reality.
The fabric of matter, the apex of our technology, and the seat of our own identity.
And all three are fundamentally black boxes. We rely on all three implicitly.
Which forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. If we don't demand full, exhaustive comprehension to use a smartphone, or trust an AI medical stand, or navigate our own minds, what is the actual standard we use to trust reality? What is the human metric for belief?
To understand that, the sources suggest we have to look away from physics and toward evolutionary biology and psychology. Why are human beings so incredibly quick to trust these profound mysteries?
The answer lies in our cognitive architecture, right?
Yes. Humans are, at their absolute core, pattern recognition engines. It is our ultimate survival software.
Let me throw out an analogy I was working on while reading the sources. Let's call it the rustle in the grass.
I like it. Go for it.
Imagine our ancient ancestors walking on the African savanna 10,000 years ago. Suddenly, they hear a sharp hiss and see a quick rustle in the tall grass near their feet. Now, that ancestor did not need a PhD in reptilian biology to know they needed to jump back.
Right. They didn't need to understand the thermodynamics of venom entering the human bloodstream.
No. The pattern was incredibly simple. Hiss plus rustle in the grass equals extreme danger. The pattern was enough to save their lives.
That is precisely how human cognitive design functions. Our brains are incredibly energy-intensive organs. They are constantly scanning the chaotic, overwhelming noise of the universe for repetition, symmetry, and cause and effect sequences.
Because the ancestor who noticed the pattern that dark, heavy clouds preceded lightning and rain and sought shelter, they survived to pass on that instinct.
And the ancestor who shrugged off the dark clouds as meaningless, random noise did not survive. We are hardwired by evolution to look for regularity, because regularity makes a terrifying, unpredictable world manageable.
We trade total comprehension for functional reliability. It's a psychological safety net. I mean, we don't need the unified theory of physics to just eat a sandwich.
Think about gravity. We can calculate planetary orbits to extraordinary precision. We can slingshot a probe around Jupiter using gravitational math.
But we still do not have an agreed-upon quantum theory of gravity. We don't actually know what a graviton is or how gravity actually communicates its force across empty space at the subatomic level.
But if you drop an apple today, tomorrow, and the next day, you trust the pattern. It falls. You don't lay in bed terrified that you're going to spontaneously float into the stratosphere just because physicists haven't solved quantum gravity.
And this reframes the entire cultural discussion about the epistemology of trust and faith. We like to tell ourselves that we are highly rational creatures who only believe what we can prove. But we don't actually operate on the rule, only trust what you fully understand.
Right. If you are listening to this, really internalize that thought. If you lived your life by the strict rule, I will only trust what I can comprehensively explain from first principles, you would be utterly paralyzed.
You couldn't fly in a commercial jet, you couldn't take a Tylenol, you couldn't use the internet, you couldn't even eat processed food.
The human species operates on a very different standard. Trust what has consistently proven reliable, even while acknowledging the remaining mystery. Consistency earns trust. That is the actual lived everyday standard we apply to physics, to AI, and to biology.
So now we reach the major pivot point of the deep dive. What does this all mean when we turn to theology? If pattern recognition is the biological and cognitive tool we use to navigate the unknown, what happens when we apply that exact same scientific and historical standard to the Bible?
This is where we encounter a profound, almost jarring scriptural alignment with our modern reality. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 55, verses 8 and 9, the God of the Bible explicitly states, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts."
Now, in modern secular debates, skeptics often point to that verse and say, see, that's just a classic religious dodge. It's a cop-out for when the theology contradicts itself, or when terrible things happen that just don't make sense.
When you look at it through the lens of our sources on modern science, this isn't a theological dodge at all. It's a cosmic heads-up. It's an epistemological warning.
Precisely. It is the creator establishing the fundamental parameters of the relationship. He is explicitly claiming an architecture of logic and operation that is structurally larger than the human cognitive frame.
And as we just discussed for the last 20 minutes, that is precisely the same relationship we already have with quantum mechanics and artificial neural networks. The math keeps working, even though our conceptual frame keeps buckling under the weight of what the math actually describes.
Expecting to fit an infinite God into the 3-pound container of the human prefrontal cortex is like an ant trying to understand the New York Stock Exchange.
Okay, that's a brilliant image.
Right. The ant might be walking across the trading floor. It feels the vibration of the subway underneath. It sees giant shoes walking past. It registers the temperature changes in the room. But the systemic macro logic of global high-frequency algorithmic finance is just completely fundamentally beyond its sensory and cognitive architecture.
The finite cannot contain the infinite.
Exactly. Yet, while the biblical claim is that God is incomprehensible in his totality, the text is equally adamant that he is not invisible.
The Apostle Paul argues this aggressively in Romans chapter 1. He states that God's invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made.
This is the concept of general revelation or natural revelation, the idea that the physical universe itself is a public exhibition of the divine mind.
Exactly. The cosmos serves as a clear, observable testimony. Think about the fine-tuning of the universe, which our sources touch upon heavily. The gravitational constant, the strong nuclear force, the cosmological constant.
If the force of gravity were even slightly stronger, stars would burn out far too rapidly for life to form.
And if it were slightly weaker, matter would never clump together to form galaxies and planets in the first place. The Oxford physicist Roger Penrose calculated that the odds of the universe's initial entropy conditions being suitable for life are 1 in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123.
I can't even fathom that number.
It is a number so small it renders the word impossible inadequate.
Or look at the Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio. This mathematical pattern repeating in the spiral of a seashell, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, the spiral arms of a galaxy, and the shape of a hurricane.
It's everywhere.
When you see that kind of deep, systemic, structural repetition, it isn't a mathematical proof in a courtroom sense, but it is a massive neon pointer. They are the fingerprints of a designer whose logic is vastly higher than ours, but whose presence is observable through consistent patterns.
And it's not just physical, cosmological patterns in nature. The sources highlight that the biblical text introduces moral and societal patterns, behavioral algorithms, if you will, that, when followed, yield measurable, consistent, positive outcomes for human flourishing.
Yes, the universal biblical concepts, things like the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The mandate for compassion for the weak. The radical, previously unheard of concept of forgiving your enemies.
Even deeply secular post-Enlightenment societies generally agree that these principles are universally beneficial. Why? Because when you actually run that behavioral code in a society, it produces immense and consistent positive outcomes.
A perfect historical anchor for this is the development of the modern hospital system. We completely take hospitals for granted today. We assume they're just a natural byproduct of human civilization progressing.
But they didn't just organically spring up out of nowhere.
No, in the ancient Roman world, if you were sick and poor, you were largely left to die.
The Romans had valetudinaria, but those were strictly military hospitals for wounded soldiers, or sometimes for valuable slaves. They were to protect state assets. They were absolutely not for the general public and certainly not for the destitute. Roman Stoicism essentially viewed pity as a defect of character.
The historical invention of the public hospital system is a direct, measurable result of the early Christian theological mandate to care for the sick, viewing every human as bearing the imago Dei, the image of God.
In 369 CE, Basil of Caesarea, a Christian bishop, founded one of the first large-scale institutions explicitly dedicated to treating the sick, the poor, and lepers, regardless of their societal value. It included housing for physicians and nurses. This laid the direct historical groundwork for modern medical delivery.
And think about the massive compounding economic and cultural impact of that today. Faith-based healthcare systems contribute over $1 trillion annually to the U.S. economy alone. The point we are making here is that the pattern works. When the behavioral algorithms written in Scripture are actually run in the real world, they produce human flourishing. It is functional reliability.
And we should also note, as one of our more philosophical sources brilliantly points out, that this divine architecture isn't just a cold, humorless, sterile mathematical equation.
No, it's not.
The biblical text reveals a creator with a highly sophisticated, robust sense of humor and irony.
Oh, this is one of my absolute favorite points from the deep dive, because culturally, people often treat the Bible as this painfully stern, rigid academic document, but read the actual stories.
They are wild.
God promises Abraham and Sarah a child when they are practically a century old. Biologically impossible. What do? They laugh. It's an absurd proposition.
Completely absurd.
And when the child is miraculously born, God literally commands them to name him Isaac, which in Hebrew translates to, he laughs. The humor isn't incidental. The humor is the point. God is leaning into the cosmic joke of using two geriatrics to start a nation.
Or look at the book of Jonah. Jonah is a prophet who is told to go preach to Israel's greatest enemy, Nineveh. He runs the opposite direction, ends up swallowed by a great fish, is vomited onto the beach, eventually reluctantly preaches.
And the text treats him with incredible comedic irony. In the final chapter, Jonah is sitting on a hill overlooking the city, pouting because God actually forgave his enemies.
He's literally having a temper tantrum. And he cares more about a leafy plant that withered and stopped providing him shade than he does about the salvation of an entire city of thousands of people. The theological lesson about God's mercy comes wrapped in a light touch and a literal punchline about a grumpy prophet.
And King David, the man who killed Goliath. He's not portrayed as a one-dimensional, flawless superhero carved out of marble. He is a deeply flawed, messy human being.
He commits adultery, orchestrates a murder, fails as a father.
The Psalms he writes alternate wildly between profound, soaring devotion, bitter complaint, sheer rage at his enemies, and desperate repentance. It's incredibly realistic psychology.
This biblical sense of proportion refusing to take human pretentiousness entirely seriously while maintaining absolute seriousness about God's character, it permits irony and laughter. It suggests that trusting this divine pattern doesn't require abandoning your humanity, your intellect, or your sense of humor.
Okay, so we've established the baseline here. We know humans trust physical patterns like gravity. We see evidence of design in natural patterns like fine-tuning. We see the historical success of moral patterns like hospitals.
But now, we need to turn a major corner in this deep dive, because our sources transition from these general concepts to the most startling, specific, and highly testable patterns in the text.
Historical and technological prophecy.
This is where the epistemological standard of trusting a reliable pattern gets put to a very specific, merciless historical test. If pattern recognition is how we survived the hiss in the grass, biblical prophecy is the ultimate test of the source's reliability.
It is God explicitly saying, I will declare the end from the beginning, so you know it is me. Let's start with the sociological anomaly of the Jewish people.
Right.
Now look, before we dive into the historical patterns concerning Israel, it is absolutely crucial for everyone listening to know where we stand today. Our sources here are looking at ancient texts and mapping them onto objective historical events.
We are not taking a modern political stance on the state of Israel. We are not endorsing any political viewpoints, left, right, or center, regarding current geopolitical conflicts.
Our goal, as always, is strictly to evaluate the data. How do ancient textual predictions map onto modern historical realities? We're impartial pattern hunters here.
Exactly. And strictly from a sociological and historical pattern perspective, the survival of the Jewish diaspora is mind-blowing.
Because the ancient Near East was a graveyard of vanished peoples, right?
The Hittites, the Amorites, the Moabites, the Philistines. When ancient agrarian nations were conquered, exiled, and dispersed by larger empires like Babylon or Rome, they vanished. That is the sociological rule.
They were absorbed into the surrounding empires, they intermarried, they adopted the local gods, and their distinct ethnic and linguistic identity was erased within 3 or 4 generations. It is a near universal law of human history.
It's like dropping a single drop of red ink into the ocean. The current takes it, and it just dissipates until it's gone entirely.
By contrast, Israel endured an initial exile to Babylon, and then a massive, catastrophic dispersion across the globe after the Roman Empire destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD.
For nearly 2,000 years, they lived without a sovereign homeland, scattered across Europe, Asia, and Africa, facing repeated, horrific attempts at systemic annihilation.
Yet they remained recognizably, distinctly themselves. They kept their religious texts, their cultural identity, and their connection to their ancient homeland intact.
Which defies every standard law of sociology, but it maps flawlessly onto the ancient texts. Leviticus 26, written thousands of years ago, explicitly promised that even in the land of their enemies, God would not cast them away or destroy them completely.
Furthermore, the Hebrew prophets spoke repeatedly and specifically of a future physical regathering. Ezekiel chapter 36 and Isaiah chapter 11, they predicted a day when the people would be gathered from the 4 corners of the earth to reestablish their land, and that Jerusalem would once again become the central focus of global attention.
And then, against all historical, military, and sociological odds, the modern state of Israel is founded in 1948, a nation born in a day, exactly as the prophet Isaiah phrased it in chapter 66, and then Jerusalem was reunified in 1967.
Whether a secular historian wants to attribute this to extraordinary geopolitical alignment, or a theologian attributes it to supernatural intervention, the objective pattern is undeniable.
A text written thousands of years ago predicted a specific, historically unprecedented durability and physical restoration for a specific, scattered people, and the pattern held perfectly against reality across 2 millennia.
It is a consistent, repeated pattern tested against the crucible of history.
But if you think predicting the movement and survival of ancient nations is wild, wait until we get to the technological prophecies.
Oh man, this is where ancient apocalyptic texts meet modern tech journals, and it honestly reads like science fiction. Let's unpack the book of Revelation, specifically chapter 11.
Consider the historical context first. The book of Revelation was penned by the Apostle John around 95 AD. He was a political prisoner exiled on the isolated, rocky island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea.
In chapter 11, John describes a future period where 2 prophetic witnesses preach in Jerusalem. They are eventually killed by their enemies, and their dead bodies are left lying in the street for 3.5 days before miraculously resurrecting.
And here's the specific verse that has baffled commentators and scholars for literally centuries. Revelation 11.9 says, "For 3.5 days, some from the peoples and tribes and languages and nations will gaze at their dead bodies and refuse to let them be placed in a tomb."
What stands out to you mechanically about that phrase? Peoples, tribes, languages, and nations will gaze at their dead bodies.
Mechanically. To a first-century mind sitting on a rock in the Mediterranean, this is pure logistical absurdity.
Think about the physical infrastructure of the year 95 AD. If a major political event or an assassination happened in a street in Jerusalem, how did news travel?
It took weeks, sometimes months, for a guy on a horse or a boat relying on wind to carry a parchment scroll to Rome, let alone getting that news to sub-Saharan Africa or the steppes of Asia or the Americas.
The idea of the entire globe simultaneously gazing at a single street corner in real time was physically, logically impossible.
Because of that sheer physical impossibility, for centuries, biblical commentators had to spiritualize this text. They assumed it was a metaphor or an allegory.
They reasoned, well, John can't literally mean the whole world will watch this happen, because there is no mechanism for the whole world to see a street in Jerusalem at the same time. There was no global infrastructure.
But today, right now, with satellite feeds orbiting the planet, fiber optic undersea cables connecting continents, social media platforms, and high-definition smartphone cameras in billions of pockets.
A multi-billion person global live stream from a street corner in the Middle East is just a mundane Tuesday afternoon. We literally watched a global pandemic spread in real time. We watch wars unfold on TikTok.
The ancient text presupposed real-time global telecommunications capabilities roughly 1,900 years before electricity was even harnessed.
The prophecy described a functional capability that had to wait for 21st century hardware to catch up to the vision.
It doesn't use modern vocabulary, obviously. It doesn't say satellite uplink or TCP/IP protocol, but it precisely described the functional reality that current technology has enabled. The pattern holds.
It perfectly fits our modern digital reality, And it doesn't stop with global telecommunications. Let's look at the digital panopticon, the economic gatekeeping system described in Revelation 13.16272.
This passage outlines a coming global authority, commonly referred to as the Antichrist, who orchestrates a centralized, inescapable economic system. The text says he forces all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or forehead so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark.
Okay, let's play the same game here. Put yourself back in the ancient agrarian world. You are a farmer, you trade silver denarii, or you barter with goats, grain, and olive oil.
The idea of a single centralized empire controlling and monitoring every individual retail transaction on the planet was a logistical pipe dream.
Absolutely. If a Roman emperor sitting in Rome issued an edict to stop a farmer in a remote province of Gaul from trading a chicken to his neighbor for a loaf of bread, he had absolutely no physical mechanism to enforce it.
The transaction was peer-to-peer, physical, and untraceable. Universal transactional control was not a coherent concept because cash and barter cannot be remotely turned off.
But today, just look at the infrastructure humming quietly in the background of our lives right now. And again, listener, we are looking at this impartially as technological development, but the parallels are staggering. We are rapidly moving away from physical cash toward a completely digital economy.
We are seeing the aggressive development of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. And we need to explain the mechanics here, because a CBDC is fundamentally different from the digital dollars currently sitting in your Wells Fargo or Chase Bank app.
Right now, your digital money is just a liability on a private commercial bank's ledger.
But a CBDC is a programmable digital token issued directly by the central bank, the government itself.
And the keyword there is programmable. We also have the rise of biometric identification systems using your face or your fingerprint to authorize payments. We have algorithmic transaction monitoring, Apple Pay, digital wallets seamlessly integrated into our phones.
The structural framework to implement total economic exclusion is no longer science fiction. It is actively being piloted by governments around the world. With a programmable CBDC, the issuer can write smart contracts into the money itself.
They can program it so that it can only be spent on certain items or in certain geographic radiuses, or they can put an expiration date on it to force you to spend it.
More importantly, we now possess the technological capability to instantly freeze a digital wallet, completely disabling an individual's capacity to engage in electronic commerce at the flip of a digital switch based on their social or legal compliance.
If you don't comply, your money simply ceases to function at the checkout scanner. The infrastructure for a controllable, exclusionary global economic gatekeeping system is now fully realized.
Again, the Apostle John didn't write down blockchain ledger or biometric RFID scanner, but the structural, functional pattern of the prophecy maps flawlessly onto the 21st century financial grid. It's predicting a system of absolute control that was impossible until about 5 years ago.
And this brings us to perhaps the most unsettling technological parallel in the sources, what we might call silicon animism.
Well, this one gives me absolute chills. Revelation chapter 13, verse 15.
Tell us what it says.
The text describes a secondary figure, the false prophet, who supports the global dictator. It says, he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed.
Give breath to the image so that it can speak and cause people to be killed. Now, for hundreds of years, readers assumed this was just traditional, primitive idol worship.
They pictured a giant bronze statue. Maybe the priests used a magical trick with smoke and mirrors, or a hollow statue with a guy hiding inside, speaking through a tube to fool the peasants.
Because the ancient mind and even the medieval mind had no cultural category for an inanimate object possessing genuine autonomous agency. Statues do not move. Metal does not think.
But to a modern reader in the 2020s, this reads like a startlingly direct, literal description of advanced humanoid robotics integrated with general artificial intelligence, or AGI.
We are quite literally building this right now. Look at the videos released by companies like Boston Dynamics or Tesla. Engineers are creating synthetic, lifelike androids with fluid kinetic motor control.
And now they're integrating large language models, the brains behind things like ChatGPT, into those physical bodies.
We are giving them the ability to read human facial expressions, synthesize natural human speech, generate autonomous responses, and physically interact with the environment.
We are aggressively blurring the line between the inanimate and the alive, The ancient concept of idolatry worshiping the work of our own hands has evolved.
John saw an inanimate object, an image granted a semblance of breath. In the biblical worldview, breath equates to life, spirit, and agency. He saw an artificial entity granted autonomy, voice, and the kinetic power to enforce commands and cause death.
The text anticipated the technological weaponization of an artificial entity long before computer science or robotics existed.
It's highly typological. Modern society is already beginning to treat algorithms with something approaching religious reverence. We ask AI oracles for truth, for guidance, for medical diagnoses, for relationship advice. We are building the idol and teaching it to speak.
Which brings us to a critical, deeply philosophical juncture in our deep dive. If the patterns are this remarkably consistent, if the historical survival of Israel, the global live stream, the centralized digital economy, and artificial intelligence all map onto these ancient texts with such shocking precision.
And if we already trust AI and quantum physics on far less comprehensible grounds...
Exactly. Why is there such deep, visceral resistance in the modern heart to trusting the God of the Bible?
Right. We trust the black box of quantum physics because the math works. We trust the black box of AI because it wins at chess and folds proteins. The biblical black box has a 2,000-year track record of accurate historical and technological prediction, plus it gave us the hospital system.
So why do we suddenly hit the brakes and demand to see the blueprints of the universe before we believe it?
Because, as the brilliant Oxford scholar C.S. Lewis profoundly observed, this isn't a purely intellectual transaction. We are now entering what the sources call the unseen battle, the friction of trust.
I love how one of our sources phrases this. Think about it. Trusting a pattern in physics costs you absolutely nothing personally.
An electron does not ask anything of you. Quantum mechanics doesn't care if you're selfish, it doesn't judge your internet browsing history, and gravity doesn't demand your loyalty or tell you how to spend your Saturday night.
Precisely. Trusting a mathematical equation requires mere intellectual assent. It leaves you firmly in the driver's seat of your own life.
But trusting the God described in Scripture comes with an implied, ultimate sovereign claim on your life. It demands your loyalty, your habits, your priorities, your very identity.
It is a fundamentally different category of trust. It is the difference between acknowledging a fact and surrendering to a king.
The resistance isn't usually an intellectual hurdle. It's not usually, oh, the evidence for biblical prophecy just isn't mathematically parsimonious enough for my rigorous scientific mind.
If we are completely honest with ourselves, the friction is almost always, if this pattern is true, if this God exists, it changes things about my life that I would really rather not change.
It is a profound psychological defense mechanism against a sovereign claim. C.S. Lewis wrote extensively about his own fierce resistance before his conversion from atheism. He described dragging his feet, looking for any intellectual escape hatch.
Not because the logic of God wasn't compelling, he realized it was overwhelmingly compelling, but because he could feel exactly where that logic was leading. He didn't want to arrive at a place where he had to surrender control. He called himself the most reluctant convert in all of England.
We demand total, exhaustive, 100% transparent comprehension from God. Before we offer him a fraction of the trust we blindly, eagerly hand over to a self-taught AI model every single day. And we have to be highly suspicious that something other than pure objective logic is doing the heavy lifting in that massive double standard.
Furthermore, our sources warn about the specific seduction of technology in this context. Biblical prophecy explicitly warns against being led astray by signs and wonders.
Jesus in Matthew 24 and the Apostle Paul in 2 Thessalonians describe a pattern of end-times deception that is highly seductive. It appeals to the core human desire for transcendence, for power, and for godlike capabilities without having to submit to God.
And what does artificial intelligence mimic better than anything else we've ever created? It mimics divine attributes.
Exactly. AI mimics omniscience because it can scrape, process, and recall vast amounts of all human data instantly. It knows everything we have ever written down.
It mimics omnipresence because it exists simultaneously across global cloud networks, accessible from any device anywhere on Earth.
And it is rapidly creeping toward omnipotence as we hand it physical control over our power grids, our financial systems, our military targeting algorithms, and our infrastructure.
This is the ultimate warning embedded within the pattern. We are increasingly eager to hand our sovereignty, our decision-making, and our absolute trust over to a machine learning model whose hidden layers we literally cannot understand.
We worship the black box we built, while simultaneously rejecting a creator who claims ultimate authority simply because he told us his thoughts are higher than ours.
It is the ultimate tragic irony of the 21st century human condition. We are desperate for something larger than ourselves to trust, but we want to be the ones who built it.
So, if we synthesize this entire journey we've taken today,
Let's do it. We are a species that is entirely comfortable living inside of mysteries. We are biological pattern recognition engines.
we rely on the profound black boxes of quantum physics, autonomous AI code, and our own inexplicable consciousness, simply because the patterns work. They prove reliable in the real world.
And when we apply that exact same epistemological standard of reliable patterns to the Bible, we do not find empty, hollow assertions. We find a stunningly consistent, mathematically improbable blueprint.
We see it historically, in the impossible survival and restoration of a specific people. We see it morally, in universal behavioral algorithms that drive human flourishing and built our healthcare system.
And we see it technologically, in prophetic visions that were utterly absurd to the ancient world, but read like modern tech journals today.
Faith, therefore, is not blind. It's not shutting your eyes, ignoring the evidence, and jumping off a cliff in the dark. Biblical faith is confidence grounded in demonstrated historical faithfulness.
It is applying the exact same standard of evidence and trust to God that you already happily apply to your smartphone and your GPS. The mystery was never the actual obstacle. Mystery is the address where human trust has always lived.
Which leaves us with a profound question to consider. And I really want you to take this thought with you today, to mull over long after this deep dive ends, while you go about your day interacting with all your devices. As our own technological creations become increasingly incomprehensible black boxes, systems that we treat with almost religious reverence and unquestioning trust, are we actually losing our capacity for faith?
Or are we simply transferring our worship from the infinite creator who made us to the finite algorithms we made ourselves?